The humidity in Makati doesn't just sit on you, it claims you. It is a thick, wet wool blanket that smells of sampagita flowers and the low sulfur exhaust of 1,000 idling jeepneys. Inside the room, the wall mounted Mitsubishi air conditioning unit hummed a frantic metallic rhythm, fighting a losing battle against the Philippine sun. David sat on the edge of the king sized bed, his weight sinking deep into the memory foam. He watched Marisol. She was standing by the open suitcase, her back to him, folding his linen shirts with a precision that felt almost surgical. Each sleeve was tucked, each collar aligned, as if she were preparing a museum exhibit rather than a middle aged man's vacation wardrobe. He reached for his wrist, his fingers tracing the cold, heavy weight of his anchor object, a 1968 Omega Seamaster. It had been his father's, a piece of mid century American engineering that felt increasingly out of place in a world of smartwatches and planned obsolescence. To David, the watch was a tether. It reminded him of who he was back in Seattle, a senior project manager with a mortgage and a thinning social circle. Here, however, the watch was something else. To Marisol, it was a symbol of the golden age, a relic of a man who belonged to a world where things were built to last. "You look like you are thinking very hard, David," she said without turning around. Her voice was light, a soft melody that cut through the mechanical drone of the air conditioner. "Just the heat," he lied. "It makes everything feel slower." Marisol turned then, holding a crisp white shirt against her chest. She was 24, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to hold a permanent, gentle curiosity. She walked over and knelt between his knees, a gesture that always made David's throat tighten with a mixture of ego and shame. She reached up, her small, cool hands grazing the gray hair at his temples. "I like the silver," she whispered, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "In my country, we say this is distinguished. It means a man who has seen the world, a man who knows how to take care of things." David wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. For the last 5 years in the States, he had felt himself becoming invisible. At the grocery store, at the office, on dating apps, he was a ghost, a demographic to be marketed to and then ignored. But here, under Marisol's gaze, the wrinkles around his eyes weren't signs of decay, they were character. His silence wasn't loneliness, it was wisdom. He looked at his reflection in the darkened screen of his laptop on the desk. He saw a man whose skin was beginning to lose its fight with gravity, whose shoulders were permanently rounded from decades of corporate stress. Then he looked back at Marisol. She was smiling, a radiant, uncomplicated expression that seemed to wash away the mirror's verdict. "You are a good man, David," she said, her hand dropping to rest on the Omega Seamaster. "Safe. Not like the boys in the city. They are like the weather, always changing. You are like this watch, always the same time." The compliment had a sharp edge he tried to ignore. She liked his predictability. She liked that his life was a closed loop of pension funds and scheduled dividends. He felt a flicker of tension, a low-frequency vibration in his chest. Was she looking at him, or was she looking at the stability he represented? He watched her move to the bedside table, where his blue American passport lay next to a stack of Philippine pesos he'd withdrawn that morning. She didn't touch them, but her eyes lingered on the passport for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It wasn't greed, he was sure of that. It was something more profound. It was the way a drowning person looks at a life raft. "Are we still going to the terrace for dinner?" he asked, his voice sounding raspier than usual. "Of course," she said, standing up and smoothing her dress. "I want everyone to see my handsome American." She went back to the suitcase, leaving him in the hum of the air conditioner. David wound the Omega, the tiny clicks of the internal gears echoing in the quiet room. He felt like a king. But as he looked at the back of Marisol's head, he couldn't shake the feeling that a king was just another word for a man with something to lose. The illusion was perfect, but the humidity was starting to seep through the vents again, heavy and persistent. He stood up to join her, his knees popping in the silence. Marisol didn't flinch. She just kept folding, her movements rhythmic, patient, and terrifyingly efficient. The terrace of the peninsula overlooked the chaotic neon pulse of Makati, but up here the air was scrubbed by expensive fans and the smell of imported gin. David watched the other couples. It was a mirror gallery, silver haired men with thick waists and tired eyes, sitting across from young Filipinas who leaned in with an intensity that looked like hunger but was performed as devotion. You aren't eating your lapu-lapu, David, Marisol said. She reached across the table, her fork expertly deboning a piece of fish and holding it to his lips. It was a gesture of extreme intimacy, yet David felt a sudden, sharp prickle of discomfort. It felt like being fed by a caregiver. He looked at her, the way her eyes never left his, the way she anticipated his need for water before he even felt thirsty. It was too perfect. It was a service level he hadn't experienced in his 20-year marriage in Seattle, where every favor was a negotiated peace treaty. I was just thinking about the flight back next week, David said, testing the waters. I have a lot of meetings. The mortgage refi is coming through. Marisol's expression didn't flicker, but her hand stayed on the table, her fingers tapping a soft, rhythmic chord against the linen. You work too hard for that big house. A man of your status should be resting. You should have someone to manage the small things so you can just exist. Manage the small things? David asked. The bills, the schedule, the house, she said, her voice dropping to a confidential hum. In the Philippines, the woman is the treasurer, the man is the sun, and the woman ensures the sun doesn't have to worry about the clouds. It was a beautiful sentiment, but David noticed she knew exactly when his status meant liquidity. Earlier that afternoon, he'd caught her looking at his bank app when he'd left the phone unlocked on the nightstand. She hadn't been looking at his photos. She'd been on the balance screen. When he'd entered the room, she hadn't looked guilty. She'd looked relieved, as if confirming a technical specification. Later, back in the room, the melody of her voice changed. Her phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration. She stepped onto the balcony, closing the glass door. Through the reflection, David saw her face transform. The soft, distinguished gaze vanished, replaced by a hard, transactional mask. She was speaking rapid-fire Tagalog, her gestures sharp and commanding. She sounded like a foreman on a construction site. When she came back inside, the mask was back in place instantly. Everything okay? David asked, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm. Just my brother, she said, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder blades, right where his chronic tension lived. He is young. He doesn't understand that a family needs a foundation. He is reckless, not like you. You are so solid. She used the word solid the way a surveyor describes a plot of land. Marisol, he said, turning in her arms, do you ever wish I was younger, that we could go hiking or stay out until 4 in the morning at the clubs in BGC? She laughed, a silver sound that felt hollowed out. Why would I want a boy who wants to dance when I have a man who has already built the floor? A boy is a project, David. You are a finished result. He looked down at her. For a second, the ego won. He felt the surge of pride. But then he saw it. A small, laminated card tucked into the side pocket of her handbag on the chair. It was a medical receipt. He picked it up while she went to the bathroom. It wasn't for her. It was a prescription for hypertension medication issued 2 months ago. The name on the script wasn't Marisol's. It was for a man named Ernesto, aged 58. When the bathroom door opened, David dropped the receipt. Marisol emerged, wearing the silk robe he'd bought her at the mall. She looked radiant, But as she walked toward him, she glanced at the Omega Sea Master on the bedside table. "It's getting late," she whispered, her hand reaching for the light switch. "You need your sleep, David. We have to keep you healthy. You are very precious to us." The morning of departure, the Mitsubishi air conditioning finally gave up. The humidity reclaimed the room within minutes, a thick, invisible tide that turned the silk sheets into damp rags. Marisol wasn't kneeling between David's knees this time. She was sitting at the small desk, the Omega Sea Master lying next to her elbow like a spent shell. She was scrolling through his phone, not the photos, but the banking app he had finally authorized her to access as a secondary beneficiary for his local expenses. "The transfer for the clinic is pending," she said. Her voice lacked the melodic lift of the previous nights. It was flat, directional, and efficient. David stood by the window, watching a group of street children navigate the gridlock below. He felt the weight of his 60 years in the way his lower back throbbed. "The clinic for Ernesto?" Marisol didn't look up. Her thumbs swiped with a practiced, percussive rhythm. "Ernesto was my father's name. It is also my son's name. He is 4. He needs the inhalers every month because the air in Tondo is poison." The truth from the night before finally crystallized. David waited for the surge of betrayal, the dramatic sting of the scammed Westerner. But it didn't come. Instead, he felt a strange, hollowed-out clarity. The distinguished gray hair, the wisdom, the safety, they were the marketing copy for a high-value lease. He wasn't being loved, he was being maintained. "You knew I saw the receipt," David said. "I left it for you to see," she replied, finally looking at him. Her eyes were no longer filled with gentle curiosity. They were the eyes of a woman calculating the remaining life of an engine. "A man like you, David, you don't want a girl who lies poorly. You want a girl who understands the value of the investment. You want to be precious. I am making you precious." She stood up and walked toward him. She didn't embrace him. She reached out and adjusted his collar, her fingers cold and steady. She began buttoning his linen shirt, starting from the bottom, her movements identical to the way she had folded them on the first day. Surgical. "In Seattle, you are a ghost," she whispered, her face inches from his. "Your wife left because you were boring. Your company wants to replace you with a version of yourself that costs half as much. Here, you are the sun. But the sun must pay for the privilege of rising." She reached for the Omega Sea Master and strapped it onto his wrist. She tightened the leather band one notch further than he usually wore it, a small physical assertion of her new management. "Is there an Ernesto?" David asked, his voice a dry rasp. "A husband?" "There is a village," she said simply. "There is a mother with no teeth, a sister who wants to be a nurse, and a son who needs to breathe. You aren't buying a woman, David. You are funding a recovery plan, and in exchange, I will make sure you never have to look in a mirror and see an old man again. I will tell you that you are handsome until the day you die, and I will mean it, because a handsome man is a man who provides." The realization hit him then, not as a moral shock, but as a structural one. The power dynamic hadn't shifted from him to her. It had simply been revealed as a partnership of necessity. The grab car idled at the Ninoy Aquino departure curb, the exhaust fumes mixing with the salt air and the heavy scent of tropical rot. David watched a man his own age across the sidewalk, clutching the hand of a girl who couldn't have been older than 20. The man was beaming, his chest puffed out with the tragic, unearned confidence of a local deity. David recognized that look. It was the frantic, brittle glow of a man who still believed the lie. David didn't believe the lie anymore. He finally understood the merger. He looked at his phone, one last notification from the banking app. Transfer successful. He thought of Marisol back in the humid room, her surgical precision now applied to the family ledger. He wasn't a distinguished man or a safe harbor. He was a utility. He was the monthly check that kept a child's lungs clear and a sister in nursing school. He was a power grid. And for a man who had been invisible in Seattle for a decade, being a utility was the closest thing to being a god he would ever know. He stepped out into the heat, the airport noise a chaotic, indifferent roar. He touched the omega on his wrist, feeling the mechanical pulse against his skin. He was going back to a grey office to manage projects that didn't matter, just so he could earn the right to come back here and be precious again. It was a cold, honest trade, and he signed the contract with every step he took toward the terminal. He realized then that the most dangerous thing you can give a lonely man isn't love, it's the sense of being necessary. Marisol hadn't stolen his money, she had sold him a reason to keep earning it. He would provide the foundation, and she would provide the theater. He joined the queue of silver-haired men, all of them clutching their blue passports like holy relics. He looked at his reflection in the terminal glass. The silver at his temples didn't look distinguished in the harsh morning light. It just looked like a deadline. But he didn't care. As long as the checks cleared, he would never have to be a ghost again. She isn't attracted to your character or your past. She's attracted to the fact that your expiration date makes you the only investment with a guaranteed exit strategy.